Good evening, Jim Rondo here. I'm the co-coordinator of the Victoria chapter of the Canadian Company of Pilgrims. I'm pleased to host this Zoom coffee house in the evening, and I'm pleased to introduce my friend, Bryson Guptill, who is an author, musician, and hiker from Charlottetown. After his retirement, Bryson decided to walk Camino Frances in 2016, and he published a book on that. And then the following year, Bryson walked in Portugal. He's also been involved in the PEI Hikers organization, and he developed PEI's own 700-kilometer long island trail, a trail that loops around PEI. His experience of walking the island trail also it motivated him to publish a second guidebook, which is a great read. It's very entertaining. And in this interview, Bryson will be sharing his experience of walking in PEI and talking about the hospitality, food, and what you'll actually see on this beautiful island. So Bryson, welcome. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your Camino and what other long distance walk you've done since 2016, and introduce us to the island walk?
Sounds great, Dennis. Or Jim, good to see you and Dennis today. It's been a while since we've seen each other face to face, but this is quite lovely. We did the Camino in 2016, as you said, in September, and we had been thinking about the Camino for a couple of years. We were thinking about going on a long distance walk from Prince Edward Island. And the Camino kept coming up as something that a lot of our friends had tried. And we counted them and discovered we actually had a dozen friends who had done the Camino and a dozen more who were planning it. So it seemed like something we should do. We talked to an experienced Camino couple, and they said, it's really very easy. It's a long walk, but accommodations and everything else is very straightforward. You don't have to do a lot of pre-bookings. It's kind of a no-brainer. So we flew to Paris and then took the train and ended up in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port. Started walking the Camino. It was everything that people said it would be. And then we met the two of you and discovered it was even more than what they said it was going to be. So we had we were highly amused by the repartee from the two of you and some of your friends. We walked with you for a number of days, and we generally had a good time. When I was walking the Camino, one of the things that I'm a little obsessed about is maps, and I felt that the maps, especially in John Brierley's guidebook, left a lot to be desired. They're what we call straight line maps, which means you go in a straight line from the bottom of the page to the top, no matter what geographic direction you're heading in. And for people that are reading maps, that's very, very confusing. Plus, they were hand drawn, so the technology is well beyond that. So I started thinking about, well, I could do a map of this thing that's a lot better than Brierley's. And then that one thing led to the next thing, was a guidebook. So with that as background, I'll tell you a little bit more about our walking experience since then. We also talked to our friends about what else we could do. People have suggested other Caminos, which we still would like to do. But we began to become intrigued with Portugal as a place, and the Rota Vicentina is a walk in Portugal about 235 kilometers. That goes along the sea coast and some of the inland villages. And we thought, well, that sounds like a great thing. We'll go to Portugal, we'll have a good time on the Algarve, and we'll also do a lot of walking. So we did the Rota Vicentina, and as we were walking, I kept saying to Sue, this reminds me so much of PEI landscape, and also PEI in terms of the booking. You have to walk about 20 to 25 kilometers a day on the Rota Vicentina. You don't see very much except farms as you walk along. You're walking mostly on dirt roads. is not really a trail per se. And at the end of each day, you enter a little town, you look around for accommodations, and you book a B&B kind of accommodation as opposed to albergue. So there's no hostel kind of arrangement, no numerous people staying in the room. You're staying in private rooms essentially. So I said, we should try, I've been talking about this for years, but we should try walking around PEI. And the thing that PEI has that is really a bonus is we were the first province to start thinking seriously about a rail trail. And the Canadian National was closing the rail line there in 1989. And the hiking organization in PEI, Island Trails, started lobbying to have the rail line converted into a hiking trail. And since then, they've not only done the tip-to-tip aspect of the rail line, but they've added all the spurs. So there's now 450 kilometers of hiking trail in PEI called the Confederation Trail. And a lot of people that come to PEI to walk that trail say it's spectacular. It's by far the best section of the Trans-Canada Trail. And yet it's not that well known, even in PEI. And that's largely because it kind of misses the point. The rail line went up the center of the province, whereas PEI is an island, a long, skinny island. And if you really want to have fun, you should go out and take a look at the scenery. So we say, well, let's try to do something that combines the Confederation Trail and getting out to the seashore. And that's basically what the Island Walk is all about.
So do you want to take us through the Island Walk? I understand you got a PowerPoint. Why don't you go through the 700-kilometer route? None of us are going to go to Spain or Portugal in the next little while. So why don't you give us the presentation on the route?
All right, I'll do that. Let me see if I can bring it up on the screen here.
And I'll try to get rid of my screen while you do that.
All righty.
Oh.
Okay, you need to turn on the screen sharing again.
Okay, you're now live.
All right. So here we are, the Island Walk. So I'm just going to walk you through some slides that we prepared for a presentation here on PEI, and you'll see what we were all about. We did this walk in October, and it took the whole month. And for a little bit of context, this was right after Hurricane Dorian had hit the East Coast, and it was a very, very dramatic storm. It covered the entire island with hurricane-force winds, and you can see what it did to the waves around the island, and what it did to some of the trees. Our trails, Island Trails is the organization I belong to, and we have 8 hiking trails around the island. And we were spending days and days just on one trail. This trail here took us 4 days to clean up. And meanwhile, one of the people hiking the Trans-Canada Trail, the Great Trail, Sonia Richmond, who's heading your way now, they encountered 150 trees in an 8-kilometer stretch. But remember that the province of PEI maintains the Confederation Trail. And so within a week, all those trees were gone, which was spectacular for us because we were walking mostly on the Confederation Trail.
Okay.
So PEI, of course, is on Canada's East Coast, but it's also, most people don't realize this is where the Great Trail actually had its genesis. The trail, because the rail trail was being removed, the railway line was being removed, people in some of the cities in PEI, Charlottetown, and especially Summerside said, this is a great idea. Why don't we convert the rail trail to a hiking trail? And there was a lot of traction with that idea elsewhere in Canada. So the Trans-Canada Trail and Island Trails both just completed their 25th anniversary. And we're going to start walking at the beginning of the Great Trail in PEI at Joe Giz Park. And this is what it looked like the day we left. This is the Charlottetown waterfront, not very far from the park. And this is what the rail trail looks like. As you can see, it's quite beautiful. It's wide. It's excellent for walking or cycling. And we set out on the trail. And then you can see we have a little map that we developed. Charlottetown is number 32 on this map because it's where we finished. And then we headed west to spot number 1 here, which is Dunedin. And day 1 and 2 went without any glitches. We stayed with some friends on first and the second night, and we started to plan how we were going to do our accommodation on the other days of the trip. We were planning mostly to stay in B&Bs. There are lots and lots of bed and breakfasts and also cottages for rent in PEI, about 1,800, which is a significant number for a province of 135,000. Actually 150,000 now, 135 when I first moved here. But that's because we have 1.6 million visitors a year. So we need lots of accommodation to look after all the visitors. On day 2, to give you an idea of what kind of scenery, in day 1, we walked a fair amount on the edge of the shoulder of some secondary roads. But by day 2, we were in Victoria by the Sea, which is a beautiful little town. It has a lovely theater. It has a little chocolate factory. It has some beautiful restaurants. This is one of them right on the wharf. And if you turn 180 degrees, this is what you see. So it's a beautiful little town, Victoria by the Sea. Highly recommend it. And then shortly after leaving Victoria, you walk on dirt roads, and this is the kind of thing you encounter. Remember, we were doing this in September, so the leaves had started at that point or in October. We were starting to get a few leaves turning in the early part of October. And this is one of the lovely roads that we walked on. And this is another one of the roads. This picture I didn't get around to taking until this spring. So there's still a bit of frost on the branches there. And further along, this is the kind of view you get before you see some of the ocean. You get a lot of the little rivers. And the other thing that was quite remarkable from this in terms of scenery is churches. There are churches everywhere. There have got to be 30 or 40, maybe 50 churches, most of them around this size, and you walk by a lot of them. So you kind of feel like you're on the Camino in terms of the religious influence. Although these are not all Catholic churches, this one here is a United Church. And the next little town we came to was Carleton, and if you have really, really good eyes, you'll notice that that's the Confederation Bridge in the background. This is the 4 hikers that did the whole walk. And Confederation Bridge, for those of you who don't know, is the longest span, 14 kilometers long, over ice-covered water in the world. Here's a better view of what the bridge looks like. So shortly after that, we're back on the Confederation Trail. We're now walking through the city of Summerside, if you can believe it. The rail trail went right down the middle of Summerside, and as a result, the Confederation Trail does too. These are the gates they have to prevent ATVs from getting on the trail. You're not allowed to use any motorized vehicles on the Confederation Trail, and we want to keep it that way. So this is the way they do it with these gates. And this is on the outskirts of Summerside. There's one little stretch here we have to walk along the highway. This is a fairly major road, but as you can see, it doesn't seem to bother the ducks very much. And right in the middle of Summerside, this is the view you get. This is a wharf right in the center of town. Now, as you know, this is right after a hurricane. So this is one of the crews that we ran into who's removing the fallen trees. We're now in October, early October, and this is the last of the trees they're cutting. An all-female crew, which is kind of interesting. And you can see what they're throwing on the side of the trail. There's a lot of tree debris. This particular section of the trail was all the poplar trees were flattened here, so they really did a great job cleaning it up. And then we headed out to the seashore, where we stayed with some hosts. And Jim, I was talking to you about this a couple of days ago. We expected to stay in bed and breakfasts or cottages the whole way, but people kept coming up and offering us a place to stay. We were getting a fair amount of publicity about walking around the island. PEI is very, very friendly to tourists. They like to do things that are attractive to tourists, and so the idea that this walk might be of interest to people outside of PEI was very appealing, and people would hear about it, and then they would offer us a place to stay. So this is a cottage in Cape Wolf that was owned by Ellen and Brian, and Brian is a retired lobster fisherman, so we heard lots and lots of lobster fishing stories from Brian. And they stayed at the cottage as well, and they were constantly looking at with the spyglasses or the binoculars, lobster boats going by and telling us who it was and what they were up to. It's quite amusing. We were at the end of lobster season. We were also at the end of potato harvesting season. This is an example of what the potato harvesting equipment looks like, and this is what some of the secondary roads that we were walking on look like as well. We're on our way to Mimnagash here. And this is if you can see the blue in the background there, that's the ocean as we approach Mimnagash. And then we headed up towards the northern tip of PEI to the area called North Cape. And there are quite a few windmills up there. This is a windmill farm. And this is what we spotted as we walked along by the windmill farm. And this is the view as you get close to North Cape. You can see the red cliffs, red roads, and the intrepid hikers as we headed towards North Cape. We rounded the tip of the Cape and made our way back to a little fishing village called Sea Cow Pond. This fisherman had just brought his boat in for the end of the season. We had a nice chat with him. One of the things that was so spectacular about this trip was not so much running into pilgrims, because we were the first people that were walking it, but local people are just so exceptionally friendly and always ready to engage in a little conversation. So this chap told us all about his boat, and it was quite a new boat, so he was very proud of it. And this is the little community of Sea Cow Pond. It's a little more than a few fishing boats and a couple of small buildings, and that's it. And those are the lobster traps stacked by the shore. Tignish is at the start of the Confederation Trail on the way back, and this lovely church is quite spectacular. This is what it looks like inside. And there's some, it has a pipe organ that was built in the mid-1800s by a firm in Montreal, very, very famous pipe organ. And there's also a shroud at the front. It's kind of like the Shroud of Turin that you can see Jesus in if you look at it just the right way. We worked our way back to some other towns along the way. This one is Misgush, and another large Catholic church, ironically called St. John the Baptist. And as I mentioned, there are a few more churches. So I went out and tried to take pictures of some of them in the early spring. You can see a little snow there. There are a lot of churches. Not every day it was sunny. This was one of the fall days that was a little bit rainy. And this is our intrepid crew with a couple of, we kept getting joined by people along the way. They found out on Facebook that we were starting every day around 9 o'clock in the morning. And so they'd just show up no matter where we're going to be and start walking with us. And the two ladies on the ends here are people who just showed up to walk that day. Not the most ideal day for walking. Again, another section of the Confederation Trail. This section runs by a craft brewery and a great burger place called Backwoods Burger. And we stopped there several times to get something to eat. And then we're back in Summerside again. The rail trail, as you can see, goes right through the town and right behind people's backyards. And the woman on the right here also joined us. We didn't know who she was before. She's walked the Confederation Trail twice. Twice because she parked her car and then walk and then turn around and come back. So so it's 450 kilometers one way. So 900 kilometers of walking. Back on dirt roads again near Long River, and just at the bottom of this hill is one of PEI's passive houses, the really well insulated German standard passive house. Nice spot. We eventually got into PEI National Park near Cavendish, for those people that know about Cavendish. It's where Anne of Green Gables is located, the Anne of Green Gables house. There was a bridge being replaced on this part of the park. So we decided to walk out to the beach, and you can see what happened here. We tried to walk along the beach without getting our feet too wet. And the beach, the sand wasn't always evident, so we ended up walking on a few rocks. I'd highly recommend these beach walks. In my guidebook, I highlight how you can get out to the beaches and walk along. There are 3 or 4 that we walked along, and there are others that you can access as well. These are wonderful walks. Here's what a beach on the North Shore of PEI looks like. Spectacular. And here's a beach on the other coast. It's the beach is still lovely. The sand is a little bit redder in on the Northumberland Strait side of PEI. This is the town of Rustico that we walk through next. You're on the beach here. You walk out to a lighthouse, and then you take from the road, you walk along. Beautiful spot. A little further down the road, they're doing oyster fishing along here. And this is in the national park. I wanted to show this one because there were a few windy days, and this day was exceptionally windy. You can see we're walking into the wind and nearly being blown backwards. It was a great time to walk. And oh, here's Sue joining us.
I'm going down. I'm going to go in the march.
Okay.
Run the march.
Oh, okay. All right.
See you there.
Okay. So here we are back on the rail trail just outside of Mount Stewart here, and you can see the leaves have really started to turn at this point. And we kept getting joined by more and more walkers. So the first 2 women you see here have subsequently joined the Island Trails board, and we have some great people who have taken part in this. The lady on the left is a former Director General of Health Canada in Ottawa who retired back in PEI. This illustrates this map. The end of the railway is actually at Elmira here, and let me try to find it. I'll get the pointer out here. So this is Elmira here. The rail trail comes along here and then ends in Elmira. And then most people wanted to do a tip to tip. So you walk from Elmira out to the tip here, and we walk along the road. Nice little secondary road, very little traffic. And then at this spot here, we walked out to the beach and then continued along this beautiful beach all the way to the lighthouse here at the end. So quite lovely, really. And again, as I say in the guidebook, I explained to you how to get out to some of these beaches. And there's the lighthouse in the distance, East Point Light it's called. And this one is Basin Head. this beach is exceptionally popular in the summer. You will find kids crowding on this bridge like crazy, and then they jump in the water down below. Strictly illegal, but it doesn't seem to stop anyone. And I went back and took a picture of this spot in the spring. You can see a little bit of snow there. That's what it looks like from the parking lot. Lovely beach. The beach is about 10 kilometers long. There are 50 beaches in PEI, so there's no shortage of beaches. And then we went into the town of Suri, has some lovely restaurants, great eating establishments, very nice hosts, and Fortune River, which runs right along beside the Inn at Bay Fortune. For those of you who've watched Michael Smith on TV, he's the chef there. He owns the Inn at Bay Fortune, great spot, lovely meals, a little pricey for islanders, but wonderful. And here's my partner in crime, Nora, who stayed in various B&Bs with me along the way. The people that we stayed with this night are both lobster fishermen, husband and wife team, and they also do blueberry harvesting. So they nothing would do, but we had to go out and try the blueberry, the harvesting machine they use for clearing the blueberry fields. So that's what we were doing here. And then when we stopped in Cardigan the next morning, we had even more people joining us. So 27 on that day. And we walked from Cardigan to Montague, which is our shortest day. It was about 12 kilometers, again, on the rail trail. Beautiful. Montague is a gorgeous little town. Then we're back road walking through Gaspereau, and it was Halloween, so you can see what's going on there. This is one of our lunch stops on one of the secondary roads. Not very fancy, but did the trick with peanut butter sandwiches. And this was our last day. Not quite sure why I showed this one, except that if you're following maps, you can really mess up. This is a good example of Google Maps making a mistake. Google Maps shows the rail trail continuing along here like this. But as you can see, in reality, it doesn't do that. And that's because the rail trail was built, the Confederation Trail was built after the rail line was taken out. In some cases, people had actually owned the rail line, so the province couldn't acquire this piece, so they ended up building a trail around it. And now we're heading on the outskirts of Charlottetown. Another rainy day, unfortunately, but you can see people had pretty high spirits. So we're ending up back in Stratford, which is on the other side of the bridge from Charlottetown. And here we are back at Joe Giz Park. Just to tell you what kind of interest there was, when we got back to Joe Giz Park at this point, there was a film crew from the CBC, and we were on the national or the nightly news, and the Guardian, the local newspaper, had us on the front page. They have a story about walking around the island the next day. So it's generated a lot of interest. This is the cathedral back in Charlottetown. If there's any interest that there is from the church to try to make this a bit of a pilgrimage for those that want to do a walk that's related to a church experience,
Well,
a religious experience.
thank you very, very much. Now, I read your book, which I have a copy of your wonderful book here. And one of the questions that most people will ask is, your book describes the food and hospitality and etc. And you've been on 2 Caminos. Can you describe the hospitality, the food, and what people would encounter on the island walk, and compare it a little bit to Camino?
Yeah, absolutely. PEI has a reputation that they call themselves the food island. So there are lots and lots of places to eat farm fresh food. Chef Michael Smith, for example, everything that he does is prepared from crops and from animals that are raised on PEI. There's some excellent restaurants along the way, all the way from snack bars to fine dining. And you go by some of the lovely eating spots. I mentioned Surrey as an example. And my book talks about some of those places, but we'll have more information on that in a couple of weeks. We're working with the PEI government to try to make this walk a little bit more user-friendly, so people don't have to do a lot of work. They can just simply go to our new website and book their accommodation and look at our map and sort out where they would like to stay and where they'd like to eat. So that will be available quite soon. You can see from this slide we have a new logo for the Island Walk. We're also going to have itineraries. So if people don't want to do the whole thing, the accommodation is very nice, but the B&Bs here are a whole lot more expensive than they would be on the Camino. So, an average overnight stay is going to cost you $100. If you're staying off season, you may get an off season rate. The off season rates right now are about $75. You'll have a nice B&B and you'll have a nice breakfast for that, but it's more expensive than the Camino, that's for sure. And there are several places that are planning to develop albergue kind of accommodation, hostel kind of accommodation. There are 3 hostels right now on the island, but they're not necessarily close to where you might stop for the night. So the other thing that we're finding is there are lots and lots of people who rent cottages, and because PEI is not very big, they're prepared to go pick up people at the end of their daily walk, and drive you back to the accommodation if you stay with them for a couple of nights. So they'll do that for several nights in a row. Okay. And so that makes it a lot more convenient. It makes it good for them, and it also makes it good for us, so for walkers. So I think that's going to be the way this evolves for a lot of people. You'll have the accommodation either send a taxi to get you, or they'll come pick you up themselves and take you back to their spot for
and this new website should give you ideas on accommodation, on meals, and all the rest. And even though the cappuccinos won't be as cheap in Spain and Portugal, there'll be some around.
There will be. There aren't quite as many coffee shops, but there are still lots of coffee shops. And I've marked them. I've got a spreadsheet as well that is much like the, I'm not familiar with the Le Puy route. Yep. But there's a chap that has a spreadsheet of all the accommodations along the way, and I've listed about 40 of the accommodations. So there's quite a few choices on my spreadsheet. I haven't focused yet on camping, but some people are interested in camping, and that would be an option as well.
The other questions we have is that you have 2 books here, Bryson. Right. One is on France and one is on PEI, and you're talking about your trip. You're seeing what people can see. You talk about food. Talk a little bit about your books, how you've done it. We've got about 3 more minutes, so okay. You can talk about your books, because they're actually a very easy, simple read. So 3 minutes for a nice description of what you've written.
All right. Well, let me finish off this little bit here. So we have signage on the route as well, and this is what the signs will look like. As I said, there's going to be a spreadsheet as well that lists a good number of the places to stay, accommodation, contact information, etc. You'll actually be able to book online with a map, and I'll show you in a second how to do that. Excellent. So we'll be ready for people when they come in 2021, and we may be even ready by September if. We only had 27 COVID cases here, and they're all resolved. So we're open for business very soon.
Good.
And this is what my book looks like, and that's the URL if you want to order one. These books were a whole lot of fun to prepare. The book that I started off with, the Camino book. Had a whole lot to do with the map, and there's a Camino map that I did that looks like this one. This one is, of course, the map of PEI, but very simple. It just shows how far you're going in one day, 21 kilometers that day for day 1, day 2. And then the map that we're developing right now has not just the days, but also the places you can stay. So as you can see, you can drill in for detail on this, and it'll allow you to see where your accommodation could be, and also allow you to book the accommodation. So you'll have lots of options. So the book for the Camino evolved from me producing a map. The book is essentially like the practical path section of John Brierley's book. It tells you what you're going to encounter during the day, and it'll also tell you how not to get lost, because we found a few times that we were getting a little off track. And there's a little button on these maps up in the corner that when you press that, it pops up a GPS and will show you exactly where you are on the route.
That's no fun. You don't get lost then.
So you can't get lost. Yeah, exactly.
So
The Camino map has now developed as the #1 map on Google for Camino maps. It's called CaminoFrances.info, and it brings up, it's got about 160,000 hits a month. So people are obviously using it.
okay.
And this one of the island is similarly the islandwalk.info. But we will also have the islandwalk.ca and the islandwalk.com when we're finished this little process.
Excellent. Well, now what we'll do is we'll open it up to other questions, and we're going to go into on live Zoom versus what we've already recorded. And so we thank you for this, and we'll chat in on Zoom.
Look forward to it.